Sarah Brennan scratched the seventh mark into stone she couldn't see. 7 days in absolute darkness. 7 days without food. 7 days with only condensation from stone walls for water. 7 days of her Uncle Garrett's attempt to murder her while stealing what her father had died to protect. The cellar measured 6 feet wide by 8 feet deep. She'd mapped every inch by touch on day one military training, overriding panic. Stone walls mortared with precision that left no gaps. Packed earth floor over concrete foundation, too solid to dig through. 7-foot ceiling constructed of stone arches supporting tremendous weight above. And the door 3 inches of oak reinforced with iron bands sealed with a lock so heavy she could hear its complexity just from the mechanism's engagement sound when they'd thrown her in here. Day one had been reconnaissance. Assess the prison inventory resources, identify weaknesses. Rangers didn't panic. Rangers adapted. Day two had been testing. The door was her only option. Walls and floor were impenetrable without tools. She'd examined every surface of that door by touch, running her fingertips over wood grain and iron rivets, feeling for structural vulnerabilities. Now day 7, her body was shutting down. Organ failure imminent, kidneys stressed beyond function, liver struggling to process toxins from metabolized muscle tissue, heart rhythm irregular from severe dehydration. But she was a Ranger, 15 years active duty, 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, earned the hard way in Fallujah and Kandahar. She'd survived worse. She'd survived this. The darkness was absolute in ways that tested even shifter vision. No light reached this cellar sealed beneath stone and earth. She'd spent the first hours waving her hand in front of her face just to confirm she still had a hand, even though she couldn't see it. The kind of darkness that made you doubt your senses, made you question if your eyes were actually open. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, controlling the physiological response to sensory deprivation. In Afghanistan, she'd been pinned in a collapsed building for 14 hours, buried under rubble in complete darkness, while her unit dug her out. She'd used breathing exercises then to manage panic, to conserve oxygen, to stay conscious. Those same exercises kept her sane now. The imprisonment had happened 5 nights ago. She replayed the memory with tactical precision, analyzing every detail for information she might have missed. It had been 200 hours when they hit her quarters. Classic raid timing, deep sleep cycle, minimal awareness, maximum confusion. Sarah had gone for the Sig Sauer she kept in her nightstand, but 3 bodies tackled her simultaneously before her fingers reached the grip. Professional coordination. Someone had trained them for this specific assault. Beta Jackson Cole had zip-tied her wrists with military efficiency. The same Jackson Cole who'd served with her father for 20 years, who'd congratulated her when she'd retired from the Army as a major, who'd shaken her hand when Marcus had named her heir. His voice had been flat, emotionless. "Sorry, Major, orders are orders." They dragged her through the packed house corridors she'd known since childhood, down 2 flights of stairs to the storage level, through the old wine cellar to a secondary door she'd only inspected once during security audits 3 years ago. A Cold War relic fallout shelter storage converted to long-term preservation space, built to be sealed, completely designed to be forgotten. Garrett had been waiting there. Her uncle, her father's younger brother. The man who'd stood at Marcus's funeral 3 weeks ago and delivered a eulogy so moving that half the pack had wept. His face in the dim corridor light had shown only satisfaction. No remorse, no hesitation. Just the smug certainty of someone who believed he'd already won. "Your father made a mistake naming you heir, Sarah." Garrett's voice had carried that particular condescension reserved for women who'd forgotten their place. "A woman, a soldier who forgot how to be a wolf. You should have stayed in the Army where you belonged." Sarah had kept her voice steady despite adrenaline flooding her system. "I earned this position, 15 years of service, 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star. Marcus chose me because I was qualified, not despite my gender." Marcus was weak. Garrett had gestured to the guards. Sentimental. He let progressive nonsense cloud his judgment. A female alpha, it's an insult to tradition to pack law to the natural order. I'm correcting his mistake. The guards had opened the cellar door. Sarah had seen the absolute darkness beyond, had understood immediately what Garrett intended. "When they find your body weeks from now, I'll express appropriate grief at your tragic suicide. Unable to cope with your father's death, unable to accept your own inadequacy for leadership, A sad but understandable end. Garrett had smiled. By then, Silverwood will have moved on, under proper leadership. They'd thrown her inside, the door had slammed, lock engaged with brutal finality, absolute darkness, absolute silence except her own breathing and heartbeat. Sarah had spent the first minutes fighting panic, forcing herself to think tactically. Garrett had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed grief and gender made her weak. He'd forgotten she'd survived 3 tours in combat zones, had led teams through urban warfare, had been decorated for actions under fire. He'd forgotten she was a ranger, and rangers didn't quit. She'd begun her reconnaissance, immediately mapping the cellar by touch in the darkness. The space was professionally constructed. Whoever built this had intended it to hold against external pressure. Stone walls perfectly mortared, reinforced ceiling, solid floor, one exit. Water had been her first priority. The human body could survive 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. In this sealed environment with limited air circulation, dehydration would kill her within 5 days maximum. But the stone walls wept. Underground moisture met cooler cellar air and condensed in thin films on the stone surface. Not much, maybe a tablespoon per hour if she was methodical. But enough. Barely enough. Sarah had pressed her face against the stone and licked. The moisture tasted of minerals and earth and survival. She'd worked systematically around the cellar tongue against cold stone, collecting every precious drop. Undignified, but necessary. Pride didn't keep you alive. Day 2 had brought the first serious escape attempts. The door was oak, 3 inches thick, old and dense. Iron reinforcement bands were riveted into place, impossible to remove without tools. Hinges were on the exterior, unreachable. But the lock was accessible from inside if she could widen the gap where door met frame. That gap was perhaps a 1/4 inch at its widest point. Not enough to see through, no light penetrated anyway, but enough to get her fingernails into. If she could widen it, if she could create space to reach the lock mechanism, she might force it open from inside. Sarah had spent 12 hours working at that gap, using her fingernails like tools to scrape at wood and stone. Her nails had torn, her fingertips had bled. The skin of her fingers had abraded away against rough stone. But she'd managed to widen the gap by perhaps 1/8 of an inch. Not much, not nearly enough. But progress. Evidence the door could be weakened, that escape was theoretically possible. The hunger had worsened on day 2. Her stomach had moved past simple emptiness into active cramping, acid churning with nothing to digest. Her body was beginning to metabolize its own tissues for energy, fat stores first, then muscle. She could feel the weakness setting in, the way her muscles trembled when she tried to exert force, the way her coordination was subtly deteriorating. Starvation was a process, not an event. It would take weeks to kill her, but it would leave her progressively weaker, less capable of the physical effort escape required. She couldn't afford to wait. Every day made her weaker, made escape less likely. She needed to break through this door soon, or she'd lack the strength to break through it all. Day 3 was when desperation had truly set in. Sarah had woken, though waking was meaningless in timeless darkness, to find her body in crisis. Her tongue was swollen and dry, sticking to her teeth. Her throat felt scraped raw with every swallow. Her heartbeat was too fast, fluttering irregularly in her chest. Severe dehydration was setting in, her body struggling to function with inadequate fluid. She'd licked the walls frantically, pressing her face against stone to collect moisture. But there was less condensation today. The cellar was drying out, the limited moisture source depleting. She might collect a tablespoon of water if she spent all day licking walls. That was nowhere near enough. An adult human needed roughly 2 liters of water daily to maintain function. She was getting perhaps 1/50th of that. 3 days without adequate water, 4 days maximum before dehydration killed her. She didn't have time to slowly widen the door gap. She needed to break through now. Sarah had positioned herself as far from the door as the small cellar allowed and charged, slamming her shoulder into the wood with all her strength. The impact had sent agony radiating through her shoulder and chest, made her cry out in pain. The door hadn't budged. She tried again, and again, and again. 20 times until her shoulder was a mass of bruises and her body was shaking from exhaustion. The door had remained sealed. All she'd accomplished was injuring herself and wasting energy she couldn't spare. But as she'd slumped against the wall, gasping and trembling, she'd noticed something. A sound. Very faint, almost inaudible. A creak. The wood around the lock had creaked when she'd hit the door that last time. Not much, barely perceptible. But it meant the wood there was flexing, was possibly weakening. If she could focus her impacts on that specific area, if she could strike the same spot repeatedly, with enough force she might be able to splinter the wood around the lock. It was possible, barely possible, but the only chance she had. Day 4 had brought new levels of suffering. The combination of starvation and dehydration was creating symptoms Sarah had only read about in survival manuals and medical training. Her vision, what little there was to see in absolute darkness, was graying at the edges. Her hearing was muffled, as if her ears were stuffed with cloth. Her sense of balance was failing, making her stagger even in the confined space. Her hands trembled constantly, making it difficult to grip anything, difficult to coordinate movements. But she'd kept attacking the door, ramming that spot near the lock, with her shoulder, kicking it with her heel, pounding it with her fists, when ramming became too exhausting. Every impact sent pain through her body. Every attempt left her weaker. But the wood was definitely giving. She could hear it creaking more distinctly now, could feel it flexing more under impact. It was working, slowly, agonizingly, slowly, but working. The hallucinations had started on day 4. Sarah had seen her father standing in the cellar with her, though she knew it was impossible. Marcus had spoken to her, encouraged her, told her she was strong enough to survive this. His voice had sounded so real, so present, that she'd reached out to touch him before remembering he was dead, that this was her mind fracturing under the strain. She'd heard voices outside the door too, people calling her name, rescue parties searching. She'd screamed for help, pounded on the door, begged someone to let her out. But when the voices had faded, she'd realized they'd never been real. Her mind was creating what she desperately needed: rescue, hope, her father's presence. Sensory deprivation combined with starvation and dehydration was causing her brain to hallucinate stimuli. Reality and delusion were blending, making it hard to trust her perceptions, hard to know what was real. But the door was real. The pain was real. The need to escape was real. She clung to those certainties and kept fighting. Day 5 was when Sarah had accepted she was probably dying. Not definitely, there was still a chance if she could break through the door soon enough. But probably. Her body was shutting down. Her kidneys were failing, unable to function without adequate hydration. Her liver was struggling to process the toxins from metabolized tissue. Her heart rhythm was increasingly irregular, skipping beats, fluttering weakly. Her medical training told her she had perhaps 2 more days before organ failure became irreversible. After that, even if she escaped, even if she found water and food immediately, her body might be too damaged to recover. 2 days. She had 2 days to break through this door or die trying. Alone in the darkness, her mind had drifted to Marcus. Her father had died 3 weeks ago. Sudden illness, rapid deterioration, organ failure. The pack healer had said it was natural causes, some virus or bacterial infection that even shifter healing couldn't overcome. The symptoms had progressed over 3 days: tremors, confusion, kidney failure, death. Sarah's tactical mind had processed information she'd been too grief-stricken to analyze at the time. Those symptoms, that progression, she'd seen it before. Afghanistan 2015. A tribal leader had been poisoned by a rival using a slow-acting toxin. Same symptom pattern: tremors, confusion, organ failure. The realization had crystallized with horrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't died of natural causes. Garrett had poisoned him, had murdered his own brother to seize the Alpha position, and then had tried to eliminate the heir Sarah to complete his theft. This wasn't just wrongful imprisonment. This was part of a broader conspiracy: patricide and attempted murder to steal power. The knowledge had filled Sarah with cold fury that burned through the delirium and exhaustion. She wasn't dying in this cellar. She was getting out. She was gathering evidence. She was ensuring Garrett faced justice for what he'd done. Military justice, if possible. Wolf justice, if necessary. The wood around the lock was definitely weakening. Sarah could feel it giving more with each impact, could hear the cracking sounds that suggested the wood was developing stress fractures. But she was weakening faster. Her shoulder was possibly fractured from the repeated impacts, making it agony to use. Her feet were cut and bruised from kicking. Her hands were destroyed from digging and pounding. She was racing her own body's deterioration, trying to break through before she became too weak to continue. Day 6 had brought the breakthrough, both literal and figurative. Sarah had rammed the door with everything she had left, putting every ounce of her failing strength into one final impact. And the wood around the lock had splintered. Not completely, not enough to open the door, but enough that she could see cracks in the wood, could feel the lock, housing shifting, could sense that just a little more force would break through entirely. She'd attacked the splintered area with her hands, digging at it with fingers that had almost no feeling left, tearing at wood that came away in jagged pieces that cut her palms. Blood had made her hands slippery, made it hard to grip. But she hadn't stopped. Couldn't stop. This was her only chance. The hole had widened inch by painful inch until finally she could force her arm through, up to the shoulder, could reach the lock mechanism from inside, could feel the heavy iron that kept her sealed in this stone tomb. But touching the lock wasn't enough. She needed to break it. And the only weapon she had was her own body. Sarah had studied the lock by touch, her fingers tracing the mechanism's shape in the darkness. Military security locks, she'd breached similar systems during extraction missions in Iraq. Heavy-duty bolt with reinforced housing. The bolt could be forced if the housing was struck from a specific angle with sufficient impact. But she couldn't strike it from outside the door. She could only reach it from inside, which meant using her forearm as a battering ram. It would shatter bones, would cause damage that even shifter healing might not fully repair. But it was the only way. Sarah had positioned her arm aimed for where the bolt housing should be based on her tactile mapping, and slammed her forearm against the metal with every ounce of strength remaining in her dying body. The pain had been immediate and excruciating. Bones fractured on impact, she'd felt them snap, felt the grinding sensation of broken ends moving against each other. But she'd heard the bolt shift, too, heard metal scraping against metal in a way that suggested she'd damaged the mechanism. She'd hit it again. Her forearm was definitely broken now. The bones moving in ways they shouldn't, pain radiating from shoulder to fingertips with white-hot intensity. But the bolt had shifted more, the lock's housing cracking under repeated impacts. Third strike. Her arm was useless now, a broken mass of shattered bone and torn tissue dangling from her shoulder. But the bolt had slid free. The mechanism had fallen apart. The door, no longer secured, had drifted open slightly, letting in a sliver of light so bright after 7 days of absolute darkness that it felt like looking into the sun. Sarah had collapsed against the door, pushing it open wider, crawling through the opening she'd destroyed her body to create. She'd emerged into a storage room lit by a single emergency light, the illumination painful to eyes that had adjusted to complete darkness. Her body was failing, shutting down from the combination of starvation, dehydration, blood loss, and injuries. She had minutes maybe before she lost consciousness, maybe hours before she died if she couldn't find water-food help. But she was out. She'd escaped. And if she was going to die, it wouldn't be in that cellar. It would be fighting, running, trying until her body gave out completely. The pack house above was silent. Deep night, most wolves sleeping. Sarah used furniture and walls to pull herself upright, her broken arm hanging useless, her legs barely able to support her weight. She staggered toward the exit, moving through corridors she'd known since childhood, but that now seemed foreign and threatening. Every shadow might hide guards sent by Garrett. Every sound might be someone coming to drag her back to that cellar. She forced herself to move with tactical awareness, despite the delirium, checking corners, listening for footsteps, staying close to walls where she could use them for support. She made it outside through a servant's entrance, emerging into cold night air that made her shiver uncontrollably. Her body had no reserves left to maintain temperature, no fat stores to burn, no energy for anything except basic survival. But the cold also helped clear her mind slightly, gave her enough focus to orient herself and realize she had exactly one chance at survival. The border. Silverwood Pack's territory bordered Ironclad, ruled by AlphaKing Devon Cross. If she could reach that border, if she could cross into Ironclad territory, Garrett couldn't follow without committing an act of war against the AlphaKing. And Devon Cross's reputation preceded him. Former Marine Corps officer. Force Recon. 25 years of service before retiring to take the AlphaKing position. Known for his justice, his protection of those seeking asylum, his absolute intolerance for alphas who abuse their authority. If she could reach him, if she could tell him what Garrett had done, she might survive this. The border was 5 miles east. Sarah could barely walk 5 feet without collapsing, but she hadn't survived 7 days in a cellar just to give up now. She started walking, staggering by these trees for support when her legs threatened to give out. Every step was agony. Every movement felt like it might be her last. But she kept moving, kept dragging herself forward, kept focusing on the border that represented safety if she could only reach it. She oriented by stars, military land navigation training, kicking in automatically despite her deteriorating condition. Azimuth 090, distance 5 miles. Terrain forested foothills with moderate elevation changes. No trails cross-country movement required. The first mile took an hour. Sarah walked upright for maybe the first quarter mile, then started stumbling, catching herself on trees, pausing every 50 feet to rest. Her vision was tunneling gray at the edges, her brain struggling with inadequate oxygen and blood flow. Her hearing was muffled sounds, distant and distorted, but she kept moving. The second mile took 2 hours. Her legs gave out completely halfway through. Sarah dropped to hands and knees, then realized she couldn't support weight on her destroyed hands or broken arm. She switched to crawling on her elbows and knees, dragging her useless arm, pulling herself forward through underbrush. Blood marked her path, torn feet leaving smears on forest floor, shredded hands dripping as she dragged herself forward. Internal bleeding, probably she could taste copper in her mouth, could feel the way her abdomen was rigid and tender. But she crawled. Miles 3 and 4 blurred together in a haze of pain and delirium. Sarah lost track of time, lost certainty about direction, just kept pulling herself forward, using fingertips and knees when her elbows failed. She couldn't tell anymore what was real and what was hallucination. Her old platoon sergeant appeared walking beside her, shouting encouragement. "On your feet, Brennan. You don't quit on my watch." She knew he wasn't real. Sergeant Martinez had been killed by an IED in Kandahar 7 years ago. But she talked to him anyway, her voice barely audible. "Roger that, Sergeant." Continuing mission. Her father materialized too, walking on her other side, speaking in that calm voice he'd used when she was a child, waking from nightmares. "Just a little farther, Sarah. You're almost there. You're so strong. I'm so proud of you." "Dad." The word came out as a broken sob. "He killed you. Garrett poisoned you." "I know, sweetheart, but you're going to make it right. You're going to survive. You're going to get justice for both of us." The hallucinations were so vivid she could almost believe they were real. Almost believe she wasn't alone in this dying crawl through the forest. But when she reached out to touch her father's hand, there was nothing there. Just darkness and trees and the sound of her own labored breathing. The 5th mile was the longest. Sarah's body was shutting down systematically. Her vision was almost completely gone, just gray shapes and shadows. Her hearing was reduced to a distant roar, like ocean waves. Her heart was beating irregularly, skipping beats, fluttering weakly. She wasn't crawling anymore. She was dragging herself forward by fingertips, inches at a time, leaving a continuous blood trail. Part of her knew this was it, that her body had nothing left, that she was dying here in the forest miles from help. But Rangers didn't quit, and she still had one more mission objective to complete. Reach the border, cross into ironclad territory, make Garrett pay for what he'd done. She felt the border before she saw its subtle shift in pack territory, the way air pressure changed crossing from one Alpha's land to another. Every shifter could sense it, could feel that invisible line where one pack's influence ended and another's began. Ironclad, she was close. So close. Sarah forced herself forward. One more time, her body barely responding, her consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. Just past that line. Just into ironclad territory where Garrett couldn't follow without declaring war. She dragged herself across the borderline, using reserves she didn't know she still possessed. 2 feet past the border, 3 feet. Far enough that there could be no question she was in ironclad territory, now under Devon Cross's jurisdiction rather than Garrett's. Sarah collapsed face first into dirt, her body in complete shutdown. She couldn't move anymore, couldn't crawl, couldn't even lift her head. She'd escaped the cellar, had crossed 5 miles of territory while starving and broken, had reached the border. But her body was done. She was dying here alone in the dirt, just past the line that represented safety she wouldn't live long enough to benefit from. At least Garrett didn't win. At least she'd escaped. Her father would be proud. The darkness closing in now was different from the cellar's darkness. This was the darkness of unconsciousness of her brain shutting down from trauma and oxygen deprivation. This was the darkness that might be permanent. Sarah let it take her too exhausted to fight anymore, too broken to hold on. Her last coherent thought was a fragment of the Ranger Creed. I will never leave a fallen comrade. But there was no one to carry her now. She was alone. Somewhere in the distance, or maybe it was just another hallucination, she heard footsteps. Running. Coming closer. A voicemail commanding speaking words she couldn't quite process. Then darkness. Complete and absolute. Devon Cross had been AlphaKing of ironclad territory for 15 years, and in that time he'd developed habits that civilian wolves found eccentric, but that made perfect sense to anyone with military background. Dawn patrols, personal perimeter checks, regular border security assessments. You didn't delegate the fundamentals, you stayed sharp. Tonight he was patrolling Ironclad's eastern border, the section adjacent to Silverwood territory, at 0500 hours. Force recon habits died hard even after retirement. Pre-dawn movement when most hostiles were at their least alert. When the world was quiet enough to hear threats before they materialized. He'd been tracking the Silverwood situation with a growing concern. Alpha Marcus had been a good leader, fair, competent, progressive in ways that strengthened rather than weakened his pack. His death 3 weeks ago from sudden illness had been unfortunate. Devon had sent appropriate condolences and offers of assistance to the neighboring pack. The response had been that Marcus's brother Garrett was serving as interim alpha, while succession matters were finalized. That response had troubled Devon. He knew Marcus had named his daughter Sarah as heir, had trained her specifically for leadership, had broken with tradition that insisted alphas be male because he'd believed competence mattered more than gender. Devon had respected that about Marcus, had shared that belief himself. He'd seen too many incompetent male officers and too many brilliant female Marines to think gender determined capability. So why was Garrett serving as interim alpha instead of Sarah assuming her father's position? Devon had sent additional inquiries asking specifically about Sarah's status. Those inquiries had gone unanswered, which troubled him further. Unanswered questions from an AlphaKing were either incompetence or deliberate evasion. He'd been considering a formal visit to Silverwood to assess the situation personally. Then he'd smelled it. Blood. Fresh blood. Shifter blood. Close to the border. Maybe past it. Devon's combat instincts went immediately to full alert. Blood near borders meant injury, attack, or death. Any of those things meant potential problems for Ironclad. He moved toward the scent with tactical precision, scanning for threats, processing information, with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd spent 25 years operating in hostile territory. The blood trail was obvious once he focused on it, leading directly to the borderline crossing, it continuing maybe 3 feet into Ironclad territory before ending. Fresh, within the last few minutes. And the amount suggested severe trauma. Devon approached the source cautiously, unsure what he'd find. Could be an attack victim. Could be a fleeing criminal. Could be someone trying to draw Ironclad into a conflict with Silverwood. He'd seen all those scenarios play out in various forms during his time as AlphaKing. What he found was a body, female, small frame, wearing torn, filthy clothes, collapsed face down in the dirt just past the border, not moving, possibly dead. He knelt beside her, rolling her gently to assess injuries while maintaining situational awareness in case this was an ambush. What he saw made fury and horror war for dominance in his chest. She was skeletal bones prominent through skin that looked gray and slack from severe dehydration and starvation. Her hands were destroyed, shredded from some terrible trauma, fingers bloody and torn. One forearm was visibly broken, bones shifted out of alignment. Her feet were torn and bleeding through shredded shoes. And she was barely alive, heartbeat so weak and irregular he could barely detect it, breathing so shallow it was almost non-existent. Then the scent hit him fully. Not just blood and injury, something else, something that slammed into him with force that nearly drove him to his knees. The mate bond, snapping into place with overwhelming intensity. Undeniable, unmistakable. This woman, this dying stranger collapsed at his border, was his destined mate, the one the moon goddess had chosen for him, the one marked as his by forces beyond rational understanding. And she was dying. Devon was beside her in a fraction of a second, gathering her carefully into his arms. Her body weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird bone sharp through skin. Her eyes fluttered and opened briefly, unfocused, glazed with delirium. But he saw the flash of recognition when their eyes met. She felt the mate bond too. Even dying, she felt it. Her lips moved, forming words barely audible. Safe, made it. Border safe. Devon kept his voice calm, authoritative, the tone he'd used for wounded Marines under fire. Yes, you're safe. I'm Devon Cross Alpha King of Ironclad. You're in my territory, under my protection. Whatever you're running from can't reach you here. But you need to stay alive. Do you understand? Stay alive. Her eyes closed again. Her breathing stuttered, stopped, resumed weakly. Devon ran, faster than he'd run in years, carrying his dying mate toward the pack house where healers could save her if it wasn't already too late. His mind was already processing tactical requirements. Medical team on standby, emergency supplies, blood for transfusion if she'd lost too much, medications for organ support if she was in failure. Guards at the border called out questions as he passed, but he ignored them, his entire focus on the woman in his arms, whose heartbeat kept threatening to stop entirely. He burst into the pack house at 05:30 hours, his command voice carrying through the building. Medical emergency, I need healers immediately. Life or death situation. Move. The pack house exploded into activity. Healers appeared within minutes, taking one look at the woman in Devon's arms and immediately calling for equipment, fluids, medications. They tried to take her from him, but Devon refused to relinquish contact, refused to let go of his mate, even as they worked around him. The head healer, Dr. Rebecca Morrison, former Army trauma surgeon, did rapid assessment with professional efficiency, severe malnutrition and dehydration, multiple injuries including badly broken arm, lacerations to hands and feet, possible internal organ damage from starvation. She's in shock and her body is shutting down. We need to stabilize her immediately or she will die. Devon's voice was flat, absolute. Do it, whatever it takes. She lives. That's not negotiable. The healers worked with desperate efficiency, starting IV lines to provide fluids, administering medications to support failing organs, setting the broken arm while Devon held her other hand, bandaging destroyed hands and feet. Through it all, Devon stayed beside her, maintaining physical contact, speaking to her, even though she was unconscious. You're going to survive this. You didn't make it across 5 miles of territory while dying just to give up now. You're strong. You're a fighter. And you're my mate. I won't lose you before I even know your name. It took 6 hours of intensive care before Dr. Morrison finally declared her stable enough to move to a recovery room. She's not out of danger yet. The next 48 hours are critical. If she survives that long without complications, her chances improve significantly. But Devon, she was very close to death. Minutes closer, and we wouldn't have been able to save her. Devon nodded, his jaw tight. She'll survive. She's already survived the impossible once. She'll do it again. Over the following hours, as his mate slowly fought her way back from the edge of death, Devon began piecing together her story. Her clothes, what remained of them, bore the silverwood crest, torn and blood-stained but identifiable. Her scent beneath the blood and filth carried traces of Silverwood territory. And when he checked with his border guards, they confirmed the blood trail originated deep in Silverwood territory, miles from the border. Someone from Silverwood Pack had traveled 5 miles while catastrophically injured, had deliberately crossed into Ironclad, seeking asylum or protection. The question was who and what had happened to cause injuries this severe. Devon sent discreet inquiries to his intelligence contacts about recent events in Silverwood. What came back was sparse but troubling. Alpha Marcus's daughter Sarah had disappeared approximately a week ago. Garrett claimed she'd fled into the wilderness, unable to cope with her father's death. No search had been conducted after the first few days. The assumption was she was dead. Devon looked at the woman unconscious in the medical bay. Her destroyed hands bandaged her broken arm, set her breathing finally steady, though still weak. If this was Sarah Brennan, and everything pointed to that conclusion, then Garrett's story about her fleeing voluntarily didn't match the evidence. You didn't get injuries like this from fleeing into wilderness. You got them from systematic trauma, from imprisonment, from torture. Devon settled into the chair beside her bed, prepared to maintain vigil for as long as necessary. She'd made it to his border. She'd crossed into his territory. She'd survived long enough for him to find her. Now she just had to survive long enough to wake up and tell him who'd done this to her, because someone was going to answer for what had been done to his mate. That was a promise he intended to keep. The woman slept her body, fighting desperately to heal damage that should have been fatal. And Devon Cross watched over her, the Alpha King, who'd found his mate dying at his border, already planning the justice that would follow once she was strong enough to deliver testimony. Outside, dawn broke over ironclad territory. Inside, the woman who'd survived 7 days in darkness began the long climb back toward light. Sarah woke to light, real light filtering through windows, warm and golden. Nothing like the emergency bulb in the storage room or the absolute void of the cellar. Her eyes struggled to adjust, pupils contracting painfully after 7 days of darkness, followed by unconsciousness. The room swam into focus slowly, white walls, medical equipment, the antiseptic smell of healing herbs mixed with something sharper, more clinical. Her body felt wrong, heavy, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She tried to move her right hand and white-hot pain lanced up her arm, forcing a gasp from her throat. Bandages covered both hands, completely wrapped thick enough that her fingers were immobilized. Her left arm was in a sling, the brakes set properly now, but still aching with deep bone pain. Easy. The voice came from beside the bed, male and steady. Don't try to move yet. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Sarah turned her head. Even that small movement took effort and found him. The man from the border, the one who'd carried her, the one whose scent had triggered something primal and undeniable, even as she'd been dying. He sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, elbows on knees, watching her with dark eyes that assessed without judgment. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, military bearing, impossible to hide even seated. Short, gray-streaked hair, scarred hands folded together, the kind of stillness that came from years of waiting for the right moment to move. The mate bond hummed between them, impossible to ignore, demanding acknowledgement. You're real. Sarah's voice came out hoarse, broken. I thought you were another hallucination. I had so many hallucinations. I'm very real. He leaned forward slightly. As are you. You're alive. You're safe. You're in ironclad territory in my PAC's medical facility. My name is Devon Cross. I'm AlphaKing here. His words from the border came back to her in fragments. Protection, safety, jurisdiction. And you're my mate, Sarah said, because the bond made lying pointless. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just acknowledgement of fact. Sarah processed that, her tactical mind working through implications despite the fog of painkillers and exhaustion. Mate bonds complicated everything, loyalties, decisions, pack politics. But they were also undeniable. Destiny or biology or moon goddess intervention, depending on which explanation you preferred. The result was the same. Sarah, she managed. My name is Sarah Brennan. I was heir to Silverwood Pack, daughter of Alpha Marcus. Devon's expression shifted minutely. Recognition, confirmation of suspicions, grim satisfaction at having the puzzle pieces fit together. Tell me what happened to you. Sarah looked at her bandaged hands, at the sling, immobilizing her broken arm, at the IV line running into her forearm, delivering fluids her body desperately needed. Where to start? The cellar, her father's death, Garrett's usurpation. How much time do we have? She asked. As much as you need. Sarah told him. Not everything. She was too weak for extended conversation, too exhausted to recount every detail. But the essential truth. Marcus's sudden death 3 weeks ago. Garrett declaring himself interim alpha. Sarah questioning the circumstances, challenging his authority. Being dragged from her quarters at 0200 hours 5 nights after the funeral. The cellar, 7 days sealed in darkness without food or water. Breaking the lock with her forearm after splintering the wood. The 5-mile crawl to ironclad border while her body shut down. Devon listened without interrupting his expression, growing progressively colder as she spoke. When she finished, his hands were clenched into fists on his knees, knuckles white with controlled fury. Garrett locked you in a cellar to starve. His voice was dangerously quiet. Attempted to murder you so he could steal the position that was rightfully yours. Did this to Magnus's daughter, his own niece, simply because you're female and he wanted power. Yes, Sarah met his eyes. And I believe he murdered my father too. The symptoms Marcus showed before death, tremors, confusion, organ failure over 3 days. I've seen that pattern before. Afghanistan 2015. Tribal leader poisoned by a rival using slow-acting toxin. Same progression, same timeline. Devon's jaw tightened. You have proof. Suspicion, training, pattern recognition. Sarah shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at injuries. But no hard evidence. It would be my word against his. And he's already spread the story that I fled into the wilderness, couldn't handle grief, presumed dead. If I return, accusing him, who will believe me? I will, Devon said firmly, and my belief carries weight. You're under my protection now, Sarah. You're my mate, which gives you the full backing of my authority. Garrett will answer for what he did to you. That's my promise. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that justice was possible. But she'd spent 15 years in the military, had seen how power worked, how people in authority protected each other, how inconvenient truths got buried. He won't go quietly, she said. When he realizes I survived, that I'm here making accusations, he'll fight back. He'll deny everything. He'll have witnesses who'll swear I was unstable, that I fled voluntarily, that my injuries are self-inflicted, or from wilderness survival gone wrong. Devon stood, moving to the window where early morning light illuminated his profile. Then we gather evidence. We build a case so airtight that denial becomes impossible. We call a regional alpha council and present facts that cannot be disputed. He turned back to face her. But first you heal. Your body needs time to recover from what it endured. We can't pursue justice if you're too weak to testify. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to demand immediate action, wanted to ensure Garrett didn't have time to consolidate his theft. But her body betrayed her exhaustion, pulling at her consciousness, dragging her back towards sleep despite the urgency screaming in her mind. Rest now, Devon said, his voice gentler. We'll discuss strategy when you're stronger. Garrett thinks you're dead. That gives us tactical advantage. We'll use it. Sarah's eyes closed despite her best efforts to stay alert. Military training told her to fight through exhaustion, to maintain situational awareness, to never let your guard down in potentially hostile territory. But her body had other priorities, and for once she had to surrender to them. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her again was Devon's voice, quiet but absolutely certain. You're safe here. I've got Overwatch. Ranger terminology. He understood. Sarah let herself fall back into darkness, but this time it wasn't the suffocating void of the cellar. This time it was just sleep, natural and necessary with someone standing guard. When she woke again hours or days later, she couldn't tell Devon was still there. Different chair position, fresh clothes, but the same vigilant presence. Watching over her like she was a mission objective that couldn't be allowed to fail. Sarah realized with sudden clarity what kind of man her mate was. Not a rescuer who needed her gratitude, not a protector who wanted her dependent, but a soldier who recognized another soldier in crisis and responded with tactical efficiency and absolute commitment. She could work with that. She could respect that. And together they were going to make Garrett pay for what he'd done. The first week of recovery was brutal. Sarah's body had been pushed so far past its limits that healing was a slow, painful process, even with shifter regeneration working overtime. Dr. Morrison kept her on strict bed rest, monitoring for organ damage, watching for signs of infection in her shredded hands and feet. Devon visited multiple times daily, bringing books when Sarah was too weak to read, herself bringing reports on the investigation he'd launched into Silverwood, simply sitting in comfortable silence when conversation was too exhausting. Why are you here so much? Sarah asked on the 5th day, finally able to stay conscious for more than an hour at a time. You're AlphaKing. You must have 1,000 demands on your time. Devon looked up from the security report he'd been reviewing. Because you're my mate. Because I found you dying at my border and I refuse to risk losing you now. Because I want to know you, Sarah. Want to understand the woman who survived what should have been impossible. He set the report aside. And because I think you need someone here. Someone who knows what happened. Someone you don't have to pretend around. He was right about that last part. Sarah had been maintaining a brave face for the healers, acting like she was fine when really she was shattered in ways that went beyond physical injuries. The cellar had broken something in her, her sense of safety, her trust that the world made sense, her belief that people she loved wouldn't try to murder her for convenience. I'm not fine, she admitted quietly. I pretend I am for the Medical staff, but I'm not. I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I'm back in that cellar, that the light and safety are hallucinations, that I'm still dying in the dark. She looked at her bandaged hands. I can't be in small, enclosed spaces without panicking. Can't tolerate being unable to see, even for a moment. And I'm so angry, Devin. Angry at Garrett for doing this. Angry at the pack for believing his lies. Angry at my own body for being so weak. Angry at everything. You're not weak, Devin said with absolute certainty. You survived 7 days of torture that would have killed most wolves in 3. You broke out of a sealed cellar with your bare hands. You crawled 5 miles while your body was shutting down. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's strength beyond what most wolves will ever possess. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Being angry about what was done to you is appropriate. You were betrayed and nearly murdered by someone who should have protected you. Anger is the correct response. The question is what you do with that anger. What do I do with it? Sarah asked. We ensure Garrett faces justice. Not vigilante revenge, but actual justice under pack law. We gather evidence. We call a council. We hold him accountable for his crimes. And then you take back what's yours. You become Alpha of Silverwood as your father intended. That's how you channel anger into purpose. Sarah wanted to believe it was possible, wanted to trust that justice existed, that evidence mattered, that truth would prevail. But she'd seen too much corruption, too many powerful people escaping consequences, too many systems failing those they were supposed to protect. You really think we can prove what he did? I know we can. Devin pulled a tablet from his jacket, called up files. I've had teams gathering intelligence from Silverwood for the past week. Surveillance interviews, background checks. What they've found is damning. He turned the tablet so Sarah could see. Photos, recorded conversations, financial records. Garrett's rule has been characterized by fear and intimidation, Devin continued. Pack members who questioned his authority have disappeared or suffered convenient accidents. Resources are being redirected to benefit his inner circle while the general pack struggles. And there are whispers, quiet, terrified whispers about the cellar beneath the pack house, and screams heard at night. Sarah's breath caught. Someone else was imprisoned there. We don't know for certain, but the implication is strong enough that several pack members have referenced it when they thought no one was listening. Devin swiped to another file. More concerning is what we found about your father's death. He pulled up medical records. Dr. Elena Torres was the pack healer who treated Marcus during his final illness. She fled Silverwood 2 weeks after his death. We located her living in neutral territory, terrified of something. You interviewed her. Sarah's heart was racing now. My beta did, carefully, offered her protection if she'd testify about what she witnessed. Devin met Sarah's eyes. She confirmed your suspicions. Marcus's symptoms were consistent with aconite poisoning administered over a 3-week period. She tried to preserve samples for testing, but Garrett ordered immediate cremation. When she questioned the decision, Garrett threatened her directly. She fled before becoming his next victim. Sarah felt vindication and horror war in her chest. So he did murder my father, planned it carefully, poisoned him slowly so it would look like natural illness. Yes, and we have a witness willing to testify to that. Devin closed the tablet. But testimony alone won't be enough. We need physical evidence, documentation, undeniable proof that even Garrett's supporters can't dismiss. The cellar, Sarah said immediately. My blood is still on that door. The damage I caused breaking out, that's physical evidence of imprisonment. The marks I scratched into the wall counting days. All of it proves I was sealed in there. Agreed. But accessing the cellar means entering Silverwood territory without permission. That's an act of aggression that could justify retaliation. Sarah's tactical mind was already working through scenarios. Not if I'm the one who enters. It's my pack, my territory by right of inheritance. I have more claim to access than Garrett does. Devin studied her, clearly running his own calculations. You can barely walk. Your hands are still bandaged. Your arm is broken. Which is why no one will expect me to infiltrate. Garrett thinks I'm dead. His security will be focused on external threats, not internal ones. Sarah pushed herself more upright, despite the pain it caused. I know that pack house better than anyone. Know the security protocols, the guard rotations, the blind spots, and surveillance. You're talking about a covert operation while you're still recovering from severe trauma and injuries. I'm talking about gathering evidence we need for justice. Sarah met his eyes. I'm a Ranger Devon, 15 years active duty, 3 combat deployments. This is what I'm trained for. Covert entry intelligence gathering evidence. Extraction. I can do this. Devon was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing tactical considerations against concern for her welfare. Finally, if we do this, and that's still, if we do it as a 2-person team, you navigate, I provide security and technical support. We go in fast, document what we need and extract before anyone knows we were there. You'd risk that an AlphaKing personally conducting an illegal infiltration for my mate who was tortured and nearly murdered. Yes, without hesitation. Devon's voice was absolute. But we don't move until you're strong enough to execute the mission. That's non-negotiable. Sarah wanted to argue that they needed to move now before Garrett had time to destroy evidence or strengthen his position. But Devon was right, she was in no condition for tactical operations. She needed at least another week to regain basic mobility and strength. 1 week, she said, 7 days to heal enough for mission capability. Then we go. Agreed. 7 days. Devon stood. I'll start mission planning. Routes, timing, equipment requirements. When we execute, we do it right. He moved toward the door, then paused. Sarah, thank you for trusting me enough to partner on this. I know trust doesn't come easy after what you've been through. You earned it, Sarah said simply. You found me dying and you saved me. You've sat vigil for a week while I recovered. You believed me about Garrett without requiring proof first. You treat me like a soldier instead of a victim. That earns trust. Devon nodded once acknowledgement between equals, then left to begin planning their infiltration. Sarah lay back against the pillows, her mind already running through mission parameters. 1 week to regain enough strength. Then they'd gather evidence that would bury Garrett. She just had to survive the nightmares that came every time she closed her eyes. The darkness, the thirst, the desperate scraping at stone walls, the certain knowledge that she was dying alone and forgotten. That night, the nightmares came worse than ever. Sarah woke screaming, convinced she was back in the cellar, that everything since the escape, the border crossing Devon finding her, had been an elaborate hallucination conjured by her dying brain. The room was dark, too dark. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, and she was trapped. Trapped, lights on. Devon's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the panic. The room flooded with light. Sarah gasped, blinking against the sudden brightness, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Devon was there, standing just inside the door in sleep clothes, clearly having heard her from wherever he'd been resting. He didn't approach, didn't try to touch her or comfort her, just turned on every light in the room and said, "You're an ironclad medical facility. It's 0347 hours. You're safe. The cellar was real, but you escaped. This is real too." Facts, concrete information to anchor her to reality, exactly what she needed. Sarah's breathing gradually slowed as she forced herself to assess her surroundings. White walls, medical equipment, windows showing night sky, Devon standing calmly by the door. Real, all real. PTSD, she managed, voice shaking. Classic symptoms, flashbacks, hypervigilance, inability to distinguish past trauma from present safety. I know what this is. Doesn't make it easier. No, Devon agreed. Knowing doesn't make it easier, but it helps to understand what you're fighting. He moved closer, but still maintained distance, giving her space. I've had my own share of nightmares. 25 years in force recon leaves marks. Different trauma, but same mechanisms. Want to talk about it or want to be left alone? Sarah considered. Military culture said, you dealt with your problems privately, didn't burden others with weakness. But military culture had also taught her that the strongest teams were built on trust and honest communication. Stay, she said. Talk to me about something that's not the cellar. Tell me about your service. Devon pulled the chair to her bedside and began talking. Not about combat trauma or the worst moments. She didn't need more darkness. Instead, he told her about the Marines he'd served with, the brotherhood, the absurd moments that happened even in war zones, The gallows humor that kept you sane when everything around you was insane. Sarah listened, letting his voice anchor her to the present, letting the stories of military life remind her that she wasn't alone in understanding what combat did to people. Gradually, her heart rate returned to normal. The panic faded. Reality solidified around her. When Devon finally paused, Sarah said, "Thank you for understanding what I needed, for not trying to fix me or tell me it'll be okay, for just being present." "You don't need fixing," Devon said. "You need time to process trauma and support while you do it. Those are different things." He stood to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "The nightmares are worse when it's dark. Would you mind leaving some lights on? I know it's childish, but..." "It's not childish. It's a reasonable accommodation for someone recovering from sensory deprivation torture." Devon moved to the door controls and adjusted settings. "Lights will stay on at 50%. Enough to see clearly, but dim enough to sleep." "Better, Samu." "Better," Sarah confirmed. Devon left without further comment, giving her the dignity of not making a big deal out of her need for light. Small gesture, but it meant everything. Sarah settled back into bed exhausted but calmer. The lights stayed on, the darkness stayed at bay. And somewhere down the hall, her mate stood watch, ensuring nothing could threaten her while she healed. For the first time since the cellar, Sarah slept without nightmares. The week passed in a blur of physical therapy, mission planning, and mounting tension. Sarah pushed herself too hard, according to Morrison, to regain mobility and strength. Her hands were healing but would carry permanent scars, the nerve damage, making fine motor control difficult. Her broken arm was set properly, but wouldn't regain full function for months. Her feet were still tender, but she could walk without limping. Good enough for the mission. Devon spent the week gathering intelligence on Silverwood, plotting entry and exit routes, preparing equipment they'd need. He worked with military precision, leaving nothing to chance, planning for contingencies and backup plans. On day 6, his beta Jackson Cole, a former Army Delta operator, returned from a surveillance run with critical information. "We located Dr. Torres," Jackson reported during their planning session. "She's agreed to come to Ironclad under protection. Wants to testify about Marcus's poisoning." But she revealed something else. He pulled up photos on the tactical display. 2 weeks before Marcus got sick, Garrett came to Torres asking theoretical questions about undetectable poisons. Claimed he was writing a thriller novel, wanted medical accuracy. She gave him detailed information about aconite symptoms, dosage detection methods, timeline for lethality. Sarah felt cold fury settle in her gut. He researched it, planned it methodically, asked the pack healer for information, then used that information to murder his own brother. "Torres is racked with guilt," Jackson continued. "Says she should have realized what he was planning. Wants to make it right by testifying." "Can we trust her?" Sarah asked. "I believe so," Devon said. "Her fear is genuine. Her remorse is real. And she kept hidden samples of Marcus's blood preserved, despite Garrett's cremation order. We've had them analyzed." He pulled up lab results. Positive for aconite, dosage, and metabolic markers confirm administration over a 3-week period leading to death. This is murder premeditated and executed with precision. Sarah stared at the evidence that proved her father had been murdered. Vindication mixed with grief so intense it threatened to choke her. "We have physical proof," Devon said quietly. Combined with Torres's testimony about Garrett's suspicious inquiries, the timeline of Marcus's symptoms, and the immediate cremation that prevented investigation, it's enough to build a case. "What about the cellar?" Sarah asked, forcing herself to focus on tactics rather than emotion. "That's where you come in," Devon said. "We need documentation, photos of the damage you caused, breaking out images of the marks you scratched into walls, blood evidence that proves you were imprisoned there. That, combined with your medical records showing your condition when I found you, creates an unassailable narrative." Jackson leaned forward. "The challenge is access. Silverwood Packhouse security has been increased since you disappeared. Garrett's paranoid. More guards, more patrols, surveillance upgraded. Getting in and out undetected will be difficult." "But not impossible," Sarah said. "I know that building. No security blind spots that haven't changed since I did the original assessment 3 years ago. And I know the guard rotation schedule, assuming Garrett hasn't completely restructured it." She pulled up building schematics from memory, sketching them on the tactical display. "East service entrance here. Minimal traffic, less surveillance coverage. From there, we moved through the storage level, my old security route to the cellar access point. Time on target, 90 minutes maximum. In document out. Devin studied her sketch. What about guards? Avoid if possible, eliminate if necessary. Sarah met his eyes. I know these people. Most of them are just following orders, don't know what Garrett really is. I'd prefer not to harm them if we can help it. Agreed. Non-lethal options only unless absolutely necessary. Devin made notes on the tactical plan. We move tomorrow night. 0200 hours insertion. Jackson provides overwatch from ironclad side of border in case we need backup or emergency extraction. Jackson nodded. I'll have a team ready. If things go sideways, we can be on Silverwood territory in 10 minutes. They won't go sideways, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. We're professionals. We train for this exact type of mission. Covert entry, intelligence gathering, tactical withdrawal. Standard operation. Devin looked at her carefully. You're ready for this? Ready to see that cellar again? Sarah's hands trembled slightly at the thought, visceral physical response she couldn't entirely control. But she forced steel into her voice. I'm ready. I survived 7 days in that cellar. I can survive seeing it again for 90 minutes. Then we're go for mission execution, Devin confirmed. Tomorrow night, 0200 hours, 2-person infiltration team. Objective, gather physical evidence of imprisonment and torture. He stood all business now. Get rest tonight. Hydrate. Eat. We'll need you at full capability. After Jackson left, Devin lingered. Sarah, if you need to abort mission at any point, if seeing the cellar triggers panic or flashbacks, we extract immediately. Evidence isn't worth your mental health. I'll be fine, Sarah insisted. I'm serious. You give the word, we're gone. No judgment, no shame, just tactical withdrawal, and we figure out another approach. Sarah appreciated the concern but knew she'd never forgive herself if she let fear stop her now. I won't abort. I need to do this. Need to face it. Need to prove to myself that I'm not broken. Devin looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded. Acknowledged, but the offer stands. He moved to leave, then turned back. One more thing. After we gather this evidence, after we call the council and present our case, Garrett will be finished. But Sarah, you need to think about what comes next. Are you ready to be Alpha, ready to lead Silverwood after everything they let happen? Sarah had been avoiding that question, focusing on immediate tactical goals rather than long-term implications. But Devin was right to push it. My father trained me for this my entire life. Military service refined those skills. I'm qualified to lead. That's not what I asked. I asked if you were ready, if you want it. Sarah considered. Did she want to be alpha of a pack that had believed Garrett's lies so easily, that had let her disappear without real investigation, that had remained silent while Garrett consolidated power through fear? I want justice, she said finally. Want my father's legacy honored. Want the pack protected from Garrett's corruption. If being alpha is how I achieve those things, then yes, I'm ready. Devin studied her face, seemed satisfied with what he saw there. Good, because you're going to be one hell of an alpha, and I'll be there supporting you every step of the way. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now than when he'd first found her. Built on more than just biological imperative, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, the kind of partnership forged through adversity. Sarah felt something in her chest loosen slightly. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had a mate who understood her, who treated her as an equal, who was willing to risk everything to help her seek justice. Together, they were going to make Garrett pay. Tomorrow night. The mission would execute tomorrow night. Sarah just had to survive one more round of nightmares first. The infiltration began at exactly 0200 hours. Sarah and Devin crossed into Silverwood territory at a remote section of border where surveillance coverage was minimal, and guard patrols passed only once every 90 minutes. Both wore dark tactical clothing, night vision gear, suppressed sidearms. Sarah moved slower than she wanted, her body still recovering, but she kept pace. The forest was silent except for wind through trees and their own carefully controlled breathing. Sarah's heart rate was elevated, but manageable, adrenaline sharpening her senses rather than triggering panic. This was familiar territory, combat operations, covert movement. She'd done this dozens of times in Iraq and Afghanistan. Different environment, same principles. Devin moved like the force recon operator he'd been for 25 years, silent, efficient, constantly scanning for threats. They communicated through hand signals, maintaining noise discipline. His presence was steadying, a reminder she wasn't alone in this. They reached the pack house at Borough 2:45 hours. The building loomed dark against the night sky, most windows unlit. Sarah led them to the east service entrance, exactly where she'd planned, and pulled lockpicks from her vest. Her bandaged hands made fine motor control difficult, but muscle memory compensated. The lock yielded in 40 seconds. They slipped inside, moving through corridors Sarah had known since childhood, but that now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow was a potential guard. Every sound could be discovery. But they moved like ghosts, silent and invisible. The storage level was darker, lit only by emergency lighting. Sarah navigated from memory, leading Devin through the old wine cellar toward the secondary door she'd been dragged through 9 days ago. The door that led to her nightmare. Her breathing quickened as they approached. Involuntary physiological response. PTSD trigger activation. Sarah forced herself to use the breathing exercises that had kept her sane in the cellar itself. Slow inhale through nose hold for 4 counts, exhale through mouth. Devin noticed, touched her shoulder briefly. Silent question. You good? Sarah nodded, kept moving. The cellar door was closed but not locked. Why would it be? Garrett thought she was dead or dying in the wilderness. No reason to secure an empty cell. Devin opened the door carefully. Sarah forced herself to step inside. The absolute darkness hit her like physical blow. Her chest constricted. Oxygen felt insufficient. Panic clawed at her throat. Devin immediately activated his tactical flashlight, flooding the space with harsh white light. I've got you. We document fast and extract. The light helped. Sarah could see the cellar now instead of just experiencing the remembered terror of it. 6 by 8 feet, stone walls, low ceiling, and the door splintered wood, and around where the lock had been bloodstains on the interior surface, visible damage from her desperate escape. Devin photographed everything methodically. The dimensions, the stone walls, the marks Sarah had scratched, counting days, 7 lines etched into stone she couldn't see. The door damaged wood, splintered outward, where she'd torn through it, the broken lock mechanism, blood evidence that would match her DNA. Sarah pointed out details with voice that shook despite her best efforts. Here's where I widened the gap. Here's where the wood finally split. Here's where I broke the lock from inside using my forearm as a battering ram. Each word was testimony. Each photograph was evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. Devin worked quickly but thoroughly, documenting every angle, every detail that would support Sarah's account. The blood trail leading from cellar to storage room exit, the condensation on stone walls that had kept her barely alive, the absolute absence of any comfort or humanity in this stone tomb where Garrett had tried to bury her. 10 minutes. They'd been in the cellar 10 minutes when Sarah heard footsteps above them. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Devin heard it too. Killed his flashlight, immediately moved to the cellar entrance, hand on his sidearm. The footsteps passed. Guards on patrol, unaware of intruders below them. We need to move, Devin whispered. Time on target is stretching too long. Sarah forced herself to turn away from the cellar, to leave this place that still held pieces of her sanity in its darkness. They exited, pulling the door closed behind them, moving back through the storage level toward their entry point. They were halfway to the service entrance when the building's alarm system activated. Harsh klaxons shattering the night silence. Lights flooding corridors that had been dark moments before. Someone had discovered their entry, or motion sensors had triggered, or security protocols had simply caught up with them. Compromise, Devin said calmly, the way operators did when missions went wrong. Do we go loud or maintain stealth? Sarah's tactical mind ran scenarios. Loud meant fighting their way out, engaging Silverwood guards, potentially killing people she'd grown up with, creating incident that could justify war between packs. Stealth meant evading until they could reach the border. Stealth until contact is unavoidable, she decided. These are my people. I won't kill them unless absolutely necessary. They moved faster now, urgency overriding caution. Guards were mobilizing. Sarah could hear them responding to the alarm, coordinating over radios, establishing perimeter security. They reached the service entrance to find 2 guards posted there. Young wolves Sarah recognized, barely 20 years old, probably assigned to this duty because it was supposed to be quiet. Devin pulled his suppressed sidearm, but Sarah stopped him. "Let me." She stepped into view. Both guards' eyes went wide with shock. Major Brennan, the taller one, Chris. Something she couldn't remember his last name stammered. "But you're dead," Garrett said. "Garrett lied," Sarah interrupted. "About my death, about my father's death, about everything. Stand down and let us pass." The guards looked at each other, uncertainty warring with training. They'd been told she was dead. Now she was here, injured but alive, accompanied by an AlphaKing. Chris raised his radio. "Sir, we have a situation at East Service." Sarah moved before he could finish closing distance and disarming him with muscle memory from close quarters combat training. Non-lethal takedowns: sweep the legs, control the weapon. Apply pressure to the carotid until consciousness faded. Chris dropped within seconds. The second guard went for his sidearm, but Devin was faster, disarming and subduing him with brutal efficiency before he could raise the weapon. Both guards unconscious within 10 seconds, no permanent damage, just involuntary nap time. "They'll wake up in a few minutes with headaches," Sarah said, already moving through the exit, "but we'll be gone by then." They were outside now, moving fast through the forest toward ironclad border. Behind them, the pack house was fully active, lights, blazing, guards deploying, vehicles starting up. Sarah's injury slowed her. Her feet weren't fully healed. Her broken arm made balance difficult. Her destroyed hands couldn't grip branches for support as they ran. But adrenaline pushed her forward, training overriding pain. They were a quarter-mile from the border when Sarah heard pursuit. Multiple wolves moving fast, closing distance. Garrett must have mobilized a response team the moment the alarm triggered. Devin heard it too. "They're going to catch us before we reach the border. We need to decide now: fight or negotiate." Sarah's mind raced through options. Fighting meant engaging half a dozen or more wolves, likely lethal force required. Negotiating meant revealing their mission before they had had time to prepare the full case. The decision was taken from her when 6 wolves burst from the tree line, head cutting off their approach to the border. Tactical encirclement professionals executing a textbook pursuit and capture operation. The lead wolf shifted to human form. Beta Thomas Garrett II, the man who'd zip-tied Sarah's wrists 9 days ago and thrown her into the cellar. "Major Brennan," his voice was carefully neutral, "you need to come back to the pack house. Alpha Garrett will want to speak with you." "I'm sure he will," Sarah said coldly. "Probably surprised I'm not dead in that cellar where he tried to murder me." Thomas's expression flickered guilt, uncertainty before smoothing back to professional blankness. "I don't know what you're talking about. You fled into the wilderness after Alpha Marcus died. We searched for you, but—" "Stop lying," Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "You personally helped lock me in that cellar, Thomas. You followed Garrett's orders to seal me in darkness and let me starve. You're complicit in attempted murder." The other wolves shifted uneasily. They'd been told Sarah fled voluntarily, that she was dead, that Garrett's succession was legitimate. Now she stood before them very much alive, making accusations that painted Garrett, and by extension them, as criminals. Thomas's hand moved toward the radio at his belt. Sarah knew what came next. He'd call for backup for Garrett himself, escalating this confrontation until violence became inevitable. Devin stepped forward, projecting authority that came from decades of command. "I am AlphaKing Devin Cross of Ironclad Territory. Sarah Brennan is under my protection and is my acknowledged mate. Any action against her is action against me. Is Silverwood Pack prepared to declare war on Ironclad?" The wolves hesitated. Attacking an AlphaKing's mate was grounds for inter-pack war, could bring down the entire regional council on Silverwood. But defying their current Alpha's orders carried immediate consequences. Thomas looked torn between competing loyalties and self-preservation instincts. Finally, "This isn't my decision to make. Alpha Garrett needs to be informed." "Then inform him," Devin said. "Tell him Sarah survived his attempt to murder her. Tell him she has evidence of his crimes. Tell him a regional Alpha Council will be convened to determine legitimate succession in Silverwood Pack. And tell him that if he attempts any action against Sarah, he'll answer to me personally." The threat hung in the air, backed by Devin's reputation and authority. Thomas made his decision, keyed his radio. "Beta Thomas to Alpha Garrett. Major Brennan is alive. She's with AlphaKing Cross. They're heading to Ironclad border. requesting instructions. Static. Then Garrett's voice, tightly controlled fury evident even through radio distortion. Detain them, both of them. Use whatever force necessary. The wolves surrounding Sarah and Devon shifted their stances, preparing for engagement. Devon's hand moved to his sidearm. Last chance to stand down. You attack me, you commit act of war. We follow our Alpha's orders, Thomas said, but his voice carried uncertainty. Sarah stepped forward, addressing the wolves directly. You're following a usurper and a murderer. Garrett poisoned my father to steal the Alpha position. He locked me in a cellar for 7 days trying to kill me. When I escaped and fled to Ironclad, he sent mercenaries to assassinate me before I could testify. She pulled out her phone, displayed photos Devon had just taken. This is the cellar where I was imprisoned. My blood on that door, the damage I caused breaking out, the marks I scratched into stone counting days until I died or escaped. This is evidence of torture and attempted murder. The wolves stared at the photos' expressions shifting from hostility to confusion to horror. Garrett told you I fled, Sarah continued, that I couldn't handle grief, that I was weak. Look at these photos and tell me that's what happened. Look at evidence of someone fighting for their life and tell me I fled voluntarily. One of the younger wolves, Sarah, recognized him as Mike Rivera, a veteran who'd served under her father, lowered his weapon. Sir, if what she's saying is true. It's not true, Thomas insisted, but his conviction was cracking. She's lying to undermine Alpha Garrett's authority. Then why did you help lock me in that cellar? Sarah's voice was steel. Why did you follow orders to seal me in darkness without food or water? You were there, Thomas. You know exactly what Garrett ordered you to do. Thomas's face went pale. The other wolves were staring at him now, realization dawning that Sarah's accusations implicated their beta directly. I followed orders, Thomas said weakly. Alpha Garrett said you were a threat to pack stability, so you helped him commit attempted murder. Devon's voice was cold judgment. How does that make you any better than him? The standoff was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah could see it in the wolves' body language. Loyalty fracturing, uncertainty spreading, the brittle facade of Garrett's authority beginning to crack. Mike Rivera made his decision first, lowered his weapon completely. I'm not fighting AlphaKing Cross over this. If Major Brennan wants to accuse Garrett before a regional council, that's her right. We should let them go. Stand down, Rivera, Thomas ordered. That's a direct command. No, sir. Mike's voice was respectful but firm. I served under Alpha Marcus for 20 years. He named Major Brennan his heir for good reason. If she says Garrett tried to murder her, I believe her. I'm not helping cover up a crime. Two other wolves lowered their weapons, clearly swayed by Mike's stance. Thomas was losing control of his team, his authority evaporating in real time. If you let them leave, Garrett will have you exiled, Thomas said desperately. All of you. He doesn't tolerate dissent. Then maybe that proves Major Brennan's point about his leadership. Mike interrupted. Alpha Marcus never threatened exile for questioning decisions. He encouraged critical thinking. Garrett rules through fear. That's not strength, that's tyranny. The remaining wolves were wavering. Pack bonds were fracturing, loyalties splitting. Sarah pressed the advantage. A regional council will convene within days. All evidence will be presented, photos of the cellar, my medical records, testimony from witnesses. The truth will come out regardless of what happens here tonight. The only question is whether you want to be complicit in attempted murder and cover-up, or whether you want to stand on the side of justice. It was calculated rhetoric designed to give the wolves an honorable way to back down. And it worked. One by one, the remaining wolves lowered their weapons. Even Thomas, faced with complete loss of authority and the very real threat of war with Ironclad, finally stood down. This isn't over, Thomas said, trying to salvage some dignity. Garrett will answer your accusations at the council. But Major Brennan, if you're lying, if this is some scheme to steal power, then I'll face consequences, Sarah said simply. But I'm not lying. Everything I've said is truth, and soon everyone will know it. Devon gestured toward the border. We're leaving now. Any wolf who tries to stop us will be considered hostile. Clear. No one moved to intercept them. The encirclement had collapsed, authority fractured, and Sarah and Devon walked through the gap toward Ironclad territory. They crossed the border at 03:47 hours. Jackson Cole and his Overwatch team were waiting weapons ready in case extraction required force. But no pursuit materialized. The Silverwood Wolves remained on their side of the border, watching but not following. "Mission success," Jackson asked as they reached friendly territory. "Success," Devon confirmed. "Evidence gathered, and we cracked Garrett's authority with his own wolves. Some of them are already questioning his leadership." Sarah looked back toward Silverwood, toward the pack house where she'd been imprisoned and tortured, toward the territory that was hers by right but that she'd have to fight to reclaim. "Now we call the council," she said. "No, we make Garrett answer for what he did." The Regional Alpha Council convened 7 days later at Ironclad. Representatives from 8 packs assembled in the council chamber circular room with high ceilings, stone walls, skylight flooding the space with natural light, designed to intimidate and to ensure nothing could be hidden in shadow. Sarah spent those 7 days preparing, organizing evidence, coordinating testimony, working with Devon to build a case so comprehensive that denial would be impossible. Her body continued healing, hands still scarred, but functional, broken arm out of the sling though, weak feet finally pain-free. She dressed carefully for the council. Formal clothes bearing the Silverwood crest claiming her identity publicly, hairstyle professionally, but she didn't hide the evidence of her ordeal. Her scarred hands were visible. Her arm carried itself differently, the injury obvious. She wanted the council to see what Garrett had done to understand the cost of his ambition. Garrett attended confident and composed. He wore full alpha regalia, projected authority and legitimacy, clearly believed this was formality, that his lies would hold, that Sarah's accusations would be dismissed as grief-driven delusion. Devon opened the proceedings with formal authority. "This council addresses serious accusations regarding leadership succession in Silverwood Pack. Alpha Marcus Brennan died 7 weeks ago. His named heir, Sarah Brennan, disappeared shortly after. Marcus's brother Garrett assumed the Alpha position, claiming Sarah fled into wildernesses and is presumed dead. We are here to determine the legitimacy of that succession and to address accusations of criminal conduct." Garrett stood playing to the council with practiced ease. "Thank you, AlphaKing Cross, though I must express confusion about this proceeding. The succession in Silverwood is clear and proper. My brother Marcus died of sudden illness, tragic but natural. His daughter Sarah, overcome with grief and unable to accept the burden of leadership, fled into the wilderness. We searched extensively but found no trace. After appropriate waiting period, I assumed Alpha position as next qualified adult male relative. This is entirely consistent with pack law and tradition." His voice carried condescension when he mentioned Sarah, subtle but unmistakable. "If Sarah has surfaced with accusations, I can only assume grief has affected her judgment. Perhaps time away has left her confused about events, unable to accept her own inadequacy for leadership. I hold no ill will toward my niece, but the pack has moved forward under stable leadership. This council should recognize that reality." Devon's expression remained neutral. "Interesting perspective. Why don't we hear from Sarah herself? She has unique insight into events you claim happened." The chamber door opened. Sarah walked in. Garrett's confident expression shattered. His face cycled through shock, disbelief, fear, rage, all in rapid succession before he managed to control himself. But that moment of raw reaction told the council everything they needed to know about his surprise that she was alive. "This is impossible," Garrett stammered. "She's dead. This is some trick." "I'm no trick, Garrett." Sarah's voice carried across the chamber with absolute authority. "I'm Sarah Brennan, daughter of Marcus, rightful heir to Silverwood Pack, and I'm here to tell this council exactly what you did to me." She moved to the chamber center where all could see her clearly. Let them observe her scarred hands, her careful movements from lingering injuries, the physical evidence written on her body. 7 weeks ago, 3 days after my father's funeral, Garrett ordered his guards to seize me from my quarters at 0200 hours. I was transported to a cellar beneath the pack house, a 6 by 8 foot stone room with reinforced door. I was sealed inside. No food, no water except moisture I could lick from stone walls. No light, absolute darkness. The council members leaned forward, expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. Garrett's exact words to me, "You will die here while I take what should have been mine. When they find your body, I'll claim you committed suicide, unable to cope with grief and your own inadequacy for leadership. Garrett surged to his feet. This is insane, complete fabrication. I did no such thing. Where's your proof? Sarah pulled out her phone, connected it to the chamber's display system. Images flooded the screens, the cellar in all its brutal detail. Stone walls, low ceiling, and the door splintered, wood-broken lock, bloodstains. This is the cellar where I was imprisoned for 7 days. You can see the damage I caused breaking out from inside, wood torn away around the lock, blood evidence that matches my doom. These marks on the wall are where I counted days by scratching stone I couldn't see. She displayed photos of her injuries, medical documentation from when Devin found her. This is my condition when AlphaKing Cross discovered me collapsed 3 feet past ironclad border. Skeletal from starvation, severe dehydration causing organ failure, destroyed hands from clawing through wood and stone, broken arm from forcing the lock mechanism, shredded feet from walking 5 miles while dying. The council stared at the evidence, shock evident on every face. Sarah continued relentlessly. You can see in these medical records the timeline of my injuries consistent with 7 days of imprisonment, followed by extreme physical exertion. The blood on the cellar door matches my DNA. The fracture pattern in my arm matches repeated strikes against metal. Every piece of physical evidence supports my account. She turned to face Garrett directly. You tried to murder me, lock me in darkness, and left me to die slowly. And when I escaped, you told the pack I had fled voluntarily, that I was weak, that I was dead. You stole my inheritance through attempted murder. Garrett was shaking now, fury and fear warring on his face. This is lies, manipulation. She injured herself to create false evidence. Then explain this. Devin stood, taking control of the presentation. Dr. Elena Torres, former pack healer for Silverwood, will now testify. Dr. Torres stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. I treated Alpha Marcus during his final illness. His symptoms, tremors, confusion, organ failure over 3 days were consistent with aconite poisoning, not natural illness. I documented concerns in his medical file and attempted to preserve samples for testing. She pulled up Marcus's medical records. Here you can see my notes querying possible toxin exposure. I recommended investigation. Garrett ordered immediate cremation instead, preventing proper autopsy. When I questioned this decision, Garrett threatened me directly. He said, accidents happen to those who ask too many questions. I fled Silverwood 2 weeks later, fearing I would be his next victim. Torres held up vials. Before cremation, I secretly preserved samples of Marcus's blood. Recent laboratory analysis confirms presence of aconite in lethal concentrations. This was not natural death. This was murder by poison. The council erupted in shocked murmurs. Garrett was white-faced now, his confident facade completely destroyed. Devin continued. Furthermore, 2 weeks before Marcus fell ill, Garrett approached Dr. Torres with questions about undetectable poisons. He claimed he was writing a thriller novel and wanted medical accuracy. He asked specifically about aconite symptoms, dosage detection methods, fatal timeline. She provided detailed information, which he then used to murder his brother. Torres nodded miserably. I didn't realize what he was planning. I thought it was innocent curiosity, but looking back, every question he asked helped him design the perfect murder. I gave him the knowledge he used to kill Marcus. That guilt will haunt me forever. Sarah let the testimony sink in before adding, Garrett murdered my father to steal the Alpha position. Then he tried to murder me to eliminate the rightful heir. When I survived and fled to Ironclad, he sent mercenaries to kill me before I could testify. Devin pulled up final piece of evidence. 6 days after Sarah arrived at Ironclad, 6 armed mercenaries infiltrated my territory, targeting the medical facility where she was recovering. We engaged and eliminated them. Found communications on their leader, linking them to Silverwood territory. Orders to eliminate target and extract body, make it look like escape attempt gone wrong. He displayed photos of the dead mercenaries in the burn phone with its damning messages. Garrett hired professional killers to operate in another AlphaKing's territory without permission to assassinate a witness to his crimes. That's conspiracy to commit murder, plus violation of territorial sovereignty. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible. Physical proof, witness testimony, documented timeline, medical analysis, all supporting Sarah's accusations and proving Garrett's guilt. One council member, Alpha Rodriguez, from Mountain Ridge, stood to question Garrett directly. If Sarah fled voluntarily, as you claim, why did you not search for her beyond a few days? Why did you immediately declare her dead? Why did you assume Alpha position within a week of your brother's death? Garrett opened his mouth, but no coherent answer came out. His carefully constructed lies were collapsing contradictions and inconsistencies too obvious to defend. Another council member. If you had no knowledge of Sarah's imprisonment, why did you send mercenaries to kill her at Ironclad? Why attempt assassination if you believed she was already dead in the wilderness? Garrett looked around, desperately seeking support that didn't exist. Every face showed judgment and condemnation. The council deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Alpha Rodriguez spoke for the council. Garrett Brennan, you are found guilty of the following crimes: murder of Alpha Marcus Brennan by poison, attempted murder of heir Sarah Brennan by imprisonment and hired assassination, abuse of Alpha authority, theft of Alpha position through false claims and criminal acts. The formal sentence was pronounced: you are stripped of all claims to leadership, exiled from all territories under this council's jurisdiction, marked as oathbreaker and kinslayer. Your word can never be trusted, your presence never welcomed. Should you commit any further crimes, death penalty is hereby authorized and may be executed by any Alpha without additional legal proceedings. Rodriguez turned to Sarah. Sarah Brennan is formally recognized as rightful heir and Alpha of Silverwood Pack as her father Marcus intended. All decisions made by Garrett Brennan during his illegal tenure are nullified. Sarah's leadership begins immediately with full council backing. Sarah felt vindication wash over her like physical force. Justice. Finally justice. Garrett lunged at her rage, overcoming whatever survival instinct remained. But Sarah was ready, combat reflexes honed by 15 years military service responding automatically. She sidestepped his rush, grabbed his extended arm, used his momentum against him. Textbook close quarters, takedown off balance. Him sweep the legs, drive him face first into the floor. Garrett was larger, stronger, uninjured. But Sarah fought smart, deflected his strikes, targeted vulnerabilities, used angles and leverage to compensate for his advantages. When he overextended, reaching for her throat, she trapped his arm, applied pressure to the elbow joint until he was forced down, then got her forearm across his windpipe. You locked me in darkness for 7 days, she said, voice deadly calm as she applied chokehold. You murdered my father. You tried to have me killed 3 separate times, and you failed. Every single time you failed because you underestimated me. She increased pressure. Garrett struggled, choking, losing consciousness. I could kill you right now. The council would call it justified. But I'm not you, Garrett. I don't murder family. I don't hide behind poison and darkness. She released the pressure, stood up, looked down at him, gasping on the floor. Guards, remove this coward from my sight. Devon's security team dragged Garrett to his feet. He tried to speak, couldn't form words through his bruised throat, just hatred in his eyes and the certain knowledge that he'd lost everything. Your exile begins now, Devon said coldly. Leave ironclad territory within the hour. And Garrett, if I hear you've harmed anyone else, if you commit any crime anywhere, I will hunt you personally. That's a promise from one soldier to a kinslaying coward who only fights victims he's already tortured. Garrett was escorted from the chamber, still trying to shout denials and threats, but his voice was broken and no one was listening anymore. Sarah stood in the center of the council chamber. Alpha of Silverwood, rightful heir, finally acknowledged. Survivor of attempted murder, finally vindicated. Beta Thomas approached hesitantly. Major Brennan, Alpha Brennan, I helped imprison you. I followed Garrett's orders when I should have questioned them. I'm guilty of complicity in your attempted murder. I request whatever punishment you deem appropriate. Sarah studied him. Thomas had helped seal her in that cellar, had followed illegal orders, was guilty. But he'd also testified truthfully when questioned, had broken ranks with Garrett when confronted with evidence. You're reassigned to Silverwood Pack security, she said. Under my direct oversight, you'll help rebuild what Garrett destroyed, help implement new protocols so no Alpha can abuse power this way again. You'll work to make things right. That's your punishment to fix what you helped break. Thomas looked stunned. You're giving me a second chance. After what I did, everyone deserves opportunity to do better, Sarah said. Whether you take that opportunity is up to you. But yes, second chance. Use it wisely. She turned to address the full council. Silverwood Pack has suffered under Garrett's corrupt leadership. I will spend the coming months rebuilding trust, reforming security, ensuring protection for all pack members, regardless of status. My father believed leadership meant service, not domination. I will honor that principle. The council members nodded approval. Sarah had proven herself through survival, through evidence, through combat. She'd earned their respect and support. Devon stepped beside her subtle show of partnership. Ironclad Territory offers full support to Alpha Brennan as she rebuilds Silverwood. Trade agreements, security cooperation, whatever assistance she requires. Sarah met his eyes, saw pride and respect there. Her mate, her partner, the man who'd found her dying and had stood beside her through everything that followed. The council proceedings concluded. Representatives departed. Sarah remained in the chamber, processing everything that had happened, everything that came next. She was Alpha now, legitimate, acknowledged with all the authority and responsibility that entailed. Her father's legacy was safe. Garrett was destroyed, exiled, stripped of everything he'd stolen. Justice had been served. But the work was just beginning. 3 months later, Sarah stood before Silverwood Pack in the Great Hall. Full pack assembly, mandatory attendance. She'd spent those months establishing authority, implementing reforms, proving through consistent action that she was capable leader her father had trained her to be. She wore formal Alpha regalia, but also her Army Ranger uniform jacket, owning both identities, military veteran and Pack Alpha, the woman who'd survived torture and the leader who would ensure it never happened again. I am Sarah Brennan, daughter of Marcus, rightful Alpha of this pack. Her voice carried to every corner of the hall. Some of you believed Garrett's lies about me. Some accepted my disappearance without questioning it. Some knew something was wrong, but said nothing because fear is powerful. I understand fear. I don't hold grudges against those who stayed silent under Garrett's tyranny. She paused, meeting eyes across the hall. But from this day forward, Silverwood operates under different principles. My father believed leadership meant service, protecting the weak, ensuring justice, valuing truth over tradition. I will honor those principles. I was locked in darkness for 7 days because Garrett believed women couldn't lead, that my military service made me unsuitable, that he could eliminate me quietly and no one would question it. He was wrong about all of that. I survived because I refused to quit, because I'm trained, disciplined, and absolutely committed to this pack's welfare. And I will ensure no one here ever faces the abuse I endured. The pack absorbed her words, some with enthusiasm, some with reservation, all with respect for what she'd survived and how she'd fought back. Sarah outlined her reforms. Security restructured with oversight boards. Succession protocols documented and council monitored. Protection policies for vulnerable members. Anonymous reporting systems for abuse concerns. Training programs open to all regardless of gender or status. She was building Silverwood into something stronger than it had been even under her father. Trauma had taught her where systems failed. Military service had taught her how to build better ones. The pack accepted her leadership, not because she demanded, but because she'd earned it. That evening after the assembly concluded, Devon found her in the Alpha's office, her father's office, now hers. Successful first official address, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Think so? Sarah was reviewing security protocols, already planning next phase of reforms. I know so. You projected authority without arrogance, acknowledged past without dwelling on it, laid out clear vision for the future. That's textbook leadership. Sarah set down the protocols. It's strange being here. In this office, this was Dad's space. I used to sit in that corner doing homework while he worked. Now I'm the one behind the desk. He'd be proud of you, Devon said quietly. You honored his legacy, proved his faith in you was justified, built something even stronger than what he created. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now than when he'd first found her dying at the border. Built on more than biology, built on shared combat, mutual respect, partnership forged through adversity. I've been thinking about the bond, Sarah said carefully. About us, about what comes next. Devon waited, giving her space to work through thoughts. 3 months ago, you found me dying. You saved me, supported me through recovery, helped me gather evidence, and achieve justice. You've been patient while I focused on reclaiming my inheritance and establishing leadership. Sarah met his eyes. You've proven what partnership looks like. Support without control, strength without dominance, respect without conditions. She stood, moved around the desk to face him directly. I choose you, Devon, not because you saved me, though you did, not because I owe you, though I'm grateful, but because in these 3 months, you've shown me what it means to walk beside someone rather than ahead or behind. That's the mate I want. That's the partnership I choose. Devon stood as well, taking her scarred hands gently. Sarah Brennan, you're the strongest person I've ever encountered. Not because you survived the unsurvivable, though you did, but because you turned survival into justice trauma, into reform pain, into purpose. I would be honored to stand beside you as your mate, as your equal, as your partner in whatever comes next. The bond sealed with finality. Both parties freely choosing no obligation or desperation, just genuine partnership between equals who respected each other's strength. They sealed it, traditionally witnessed later by both packs creating formal alliance between Silverwood and Ironclad. But the real bond was already complete, forged through shared combat, mutual respect, and the understanding that the strongest partnerships were built on equality rather than dependence. That night alone in their shared quarters, Sarah looked at her scarred hands, permanent reminders of 7 days breaking through that cellar door. I used to hate these scars, she said quietly, hated what they represented, that someone had tried to destroy me, that I'd carry evidence of Garrett's cruelty forever. Devon took her hands, traced the scars with gentle fingers. What do you think of them now? Now I see evidence of survival, proof that when someone tried to bury me, I clawed my way back. They remind me I'm strong enough to break through stone and wood and metal when my life depends on it. Sarah met his eyes. They remind me never to abuse power, never to become the kind of alpha who would imprison someone simply for being inconvenient. You never will, Devon said with absolute certainty. You know too well what powerlessness costs. You'll lead with that knowledge. Protect your pack with the ferocity of someone who remembers what it means to need protection and receive only cruelty. They stood together at the window looking out over Silverwood territory. Sarah's territory now. Her pack. Her responsibility. She'd survived torture, escaped certain death, crawled 5 miles while dying, gathered evidence, faced down her would-be murderer, reclaimed her inheritance, built something stronger than before. And she'd done it not by surrendering to victimhood, but by refusing to let trauma define her, by choosing to fight, by turning pain into purpose. 1 year later, a report came from neutral territory. Garrett had attempted to infiltrate another pack using false identity, was discovered, tried to resist, was executed under the council's standing death penalty authorization. Sarah felt no satisfaction at the news, no grief either, just relief that he could never hurt anyone again. She filed the report and returned to the work of leading Silverwood. The pack was thriving now, stronger, safer, more just than it had been even under her father's leadership. She'd proven that women could lead as effectively as men, that competence mattered more than tradition, that the strongest leaders were those who survived the unsurvivable and came back determined to protect others from similar fate. They'd locked her in darkness for 7 days. She'd broken out and collapsed at the AlphaKing's border. And in surviving and fighting and refusing to die quietly, she'd reclaimed not just her inheritance, but her entire future. As Alpha, as mate, as a wolf who'd faced death and chosen life on her own terms. The scars on her hands would never fade, but they no longer represented victimization. They represented victory, proof that Sarah Brennan was exactly the leader her father had known she could be. Strong enough to break through anything, determined enough to never quit, and wise enough to ensure no one under her protection would ever face the darkness she'd survived.